Recording in progress.
Hi there. I hope all of you are doing great, wonderful, and you're in the best of your health. So let me ask you a simple question. Do you enjoy watching movies? I hope you're answering yes, because I definitely enjoy watching movies. And movies not only entertain us, but I think great movies tend to also inspire us. So I'm going to share with you one such movie which I saw recently, which is not a recent movie, of course, but it's a wonderful movie nonetheless. So we're going to talk about this movie today. Okay. So I hope that it really excites you, because talking about movies is always exciting, no matter which language, which genre, which country they belong to. But I think great movies tend to go beyond boundaries, beyond languages. And one such movie that we are going to talk about today is called Ford versus Ferrari. Okay, so if you love car racing, if you are a sports enthusiast, you will enjoy this movie much more. But even if you're not, there is still in this movie for everyone to be entertained. So what is this movie about? Why should you watch this movie, etc., etc.? Lots and lots of questions. But let me first of all begin with what is the context of this movie. So Ford versus Ferrari is a movie which is based on the backdrop of the 1966 Le Mans race, which happens in France, one of the most reputed sports car racing that ever takes place. And that's the basic context on which the movie is based. But there is much more beyond that. It talks about the competition, the rivalry that existed between Ford and Ferrari. So Ford, some of you might know, is a very, very popular American company which is into manufacturing of cars. And Ferrari, of course, is an Italian giant in the manufacture of popularly sports cars. Okay, so this is the story that we are going to talk about. And let me begin with some of the basic details for you to understand what is the story about. So first and foremost, the people who are part of this movie. So the cast and crew of this movie includes some of the most fascinating, star-studded, attractive faces and actors that you could ever anticipate. So we have Christian Bale, one of my favorite actors. You must have seen the Batman series. Even if you haven't seen, go and please watch it. So Christian Bale is one of the finest British actors that you'll see in the modern era. You have Matt Damon, and then you have many other actors like John Bernthal who have graced this movie. And this movie is directed by James Mangold, who has done a superb job in directing this movie. Why, you'll understand as we talk more about it. But so it's a really wonderful star cast that you'll get to see here. Christian Bale plays the role of Ken Miles, who is the one who is fascinated by cars, who drives sports cars, owns his own garage in the movie as well. And Matt Damon is also a sports enthusiast. He races cars, but unfortunately, in the movie, he comes across a point where he can't continue to race anymore. So he plays the role of Carroll Shelby, who is someone who understands the inner and outer parts of the car like anything. Okay, he's also someone who is into selling cars. So that's a bit of a background about the star cast for you. Something about the movie in general, it was released in the year 2019, so some years ago, but I suppose that great movies never age, and that's perhaps the reason we are talking about this movie even today. What's the genre of the movie? It's a drama-based movie, but the context is sports. So if you're a sports lover, a sports enthusiast, specifically in car racing, then you must watch this movie. You can't ignore this movie. I mean, if you haven't watched it yet, you must. The duration of this movie is 2 hours and 32 minutes. Slightly looks on the higher side, but it's justified. Given what is shown in the movie, you will come to agree with me that it does require that amount of time. The IMDb rating, so IMDb is an agency which rates movies. The IMDb rating of this movie on a scale of 10 is 8.1, which is really very, very high. Okay, so that's in a nutshell about some details about this movie. So what is the movie about? There are so many things that you must look at, but before I talk about that, let me also tell you that this movie is about competition. It's about corporate rivalry. It's about corporate rivalry between two giants, Ford and Ferrari. So the story goes like this. I'm not going to spill all the beans, of course, but the story goes like this, that Ford wants to manufacture cars which are not only reputed, but which are meaningful, which stand for victory. And currently, the car that stands for victory is the Ferrari car. So Ford decides to manufacture a sports car that can win it, the reputed Le Mans race in France. And in comes Carroll Shelby, who is the guy who will find Ford the right driver. And then Carroll Shelby comes in contact with his old mate, his friend, Ken Miles, who is the right person to do the job. So I'll not spill the beans more about what the movie is, but it's basically about the rivalry between these two companies. And there comes a point when Ferrari tends to humiliate the executives of Ford, saying that you're not good enough to win the race. And that's when Ford goes all out to prove that they are amongst the best, not only amongst the best, perhaps they are the best, and they can win this race. So ego clashes at the corporate level, but you can see much more beyond that as well. Some of the most powerful scenes that you'll watch in this movie. One of my personal favorite scenes is when Carroll Shelby, that is played by Matt Damon, actually goes and meets his friend Ken Miles. So he tries to convince him that, this is what Ford is going to do. Ford is going to manufacture a car, which is going to be a sports car, and they want to compete the Le Mans race. Now, Ken Miles is a tough nut to crack. The role that Christian Bale plays is a tough nut to crack. He does not agree to it initially. But what is beautiful about the scene is that you see the ability of a guy who is passionate about car racing, who is passionate about doing the unthinkable and the impossible, convincing his friend about doing something like this. So it's a very sensitive scene, but very, very well shot. I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes that you'll come to see, where two friends are talking about doing something unthinkable, unimaginable. And of course, I think this scene really, really merits very high, because it shows the ability of a genuine, passionate entrepreneur, sports enthusiast to convince his friend that this is something that can be achieved. It is doable, it is possible. So when you watch the movie, do not miss on this scene, even for a moment. Do not blink your eyelid. But another scene which I think is very beautiful, perhaps according to me, arguably this might be the best scene in the movie, and it does not involve any cars in the backdrop, but this movie is about convincing someone at the top management level. So it's a scene where Matt Damon, that is played by Carroll Shelby, tends to meet Henry Ford II, and they are having a very heated exchange. Of course, heated exchange in the sense Mr. Ford is not very happy with the progress that has happened so far. He doesn't believe that they have arrived or they are even closer to beating Ferrari. But that's the time Carroll Shelby convinces Mr. Ford that they need to go ahead with this project. And how does he does that? Well, couple of things that you'll get to see in this particular scene. He is absolutely honest. He is not bootlicking. He is not doing any kind of ego massage, but he's absolutely straightforward. He speaks his heart out, and he says, Mr. Ford, if you want to do something like this, you can't get a committee around it. You need to have one person running the show, and that person for you is me. So you need to give me complete control so that I can pull this off for you. And the way he does this is amazing. Okay, so when you watch the scene, you will definitely have goosebumps, because it's a very, very intense scene. It's one of those scenes where you'll see a lot of convincing taking place, but subtle convincing taking place, almost to an extent that you're challenging someone's ego and getting things done. So this is something that you must watch with an eye of a corporate person, because you will be in situations like this quite often, if not every time. So it will definitely give you a lot of insights about how do you handle ego at that level, and how do you convince your point of view without mincing words, without messing around. So that's what this scene is all about. But there are many other fascinating scenes in this movie. One of the other scenes, which also features Matt Damon with Mr. Henry Ford in the movie, that's Carroll Shelby with Henry Ford, is when he actually has completed the manufacture of the car, the GT40, as it is called, the Ford GT40. And this is the car that's going to be used during the race. And he is giving Mr. Henry Ford a demo of the car. And at the end of the scene, you have Mr. Henry Ford absolutely crying and weeping like a small baby out of happiness. It just goes to show that no matter who you are, at the end of the day, when you see something impossible coming into life, it just leaves you in complete mesmerized state of mind. And also, it's a testimony of the fact that, this scene is a little bit later than the earlier scene where Carroll Shelby is trying to convince Mr. Ford. But this scene also talks about the fact that you can do a lot of talking, but unless you can demonstrate what you've said, people would not believe you. So this is where uh, Matt Damon, that is Carroll Shelby, convinces Mr. Ford that they finally have a machine which can help them win the Le Mans race. And this is sheer out of happiness. He's overwhelmed by emotions that Henry Ford is crying here. But at the same time, Carroll Shelby also uses this moment to convince Mr. Ford why Ken Miles is the right driver. Okay, because of the internal politics that happens at Ford, there is a possibility that Ken Miles might be dropped as a driver. I haven't revealed all that part to you, but there is a possibility. There is a sequence where Ken Miles is not being looked upon as the right driver, but you know what, Carroll Shelby is Carroll Shelby. He's hell-bent. He knows that he wants his guy. And how does he demonstrate that? He takes Mr. Henry Ford on a ride, shows him the car they've got, and says, I need the driver who can ride this car. And that's how he gets Ken Miles doing the job for them. And on the other side, you see Ken Miles during the 1966 Le Mans race, where Ken Miles does the unthinkable. He is someone who defeats the Ferrari car. And I'll not talk about how the scene unfolds towards the end, but in a sense, he wins the car race and he creates history. And he not just does it once, but there are many other years thereafter when Ken Miles continues to do a wonderful job. One of the most fascinating characters that Christian Bale has played. And as I said earlier, he is a guy who can play versatile personalities with effortless grace. And you do see that during the course of this movie as well. So do watch out this pulsating scene when Ken Miles is full throttle on Top Gear, defeating everyone like never ever before. But it's not easy. It's not easy. They go through a lot of trials and a lot of tests before they reach this particular point. But wow, what a scene. What an amazing scene this is, where you see Ken Miles doing something which is unbelievable. Okay. All right. So over to some of the dialogues in this movie. I am someone who always believes that dialogues bring the movie to life, because you remember the dialogues long after you've forgotten the movie, right? Any movie that you would have seen till date, you would remember the dialogue if you like the movie. So dialogues are really an integral part of the movie, and full marks to the people who wrote the dialogue for this movie. The first dialogue that you see here is by Carroll Shelby. That's the character played by Matt Damon. He says, it's a truly lucky man who knows what he wants to do in this world, because that man will never work a day in his life. Isn't that true? That's absolutely 100% nailed it, right? So that's Carroll Shelby. Also defines the kind of persona that Carroll Shelby is. He's a very tough guy. He knows what he wants and he goes full throttle to get what he wants. And the other statement is by Ken Miles. That's Christian Bale for you. If you're going to push a piece of machinery to the limit and expect it to hold together, you have to have some sense of where that limit is. That is Ken Miles for you. That's Christian Bale's dialogue in the movie. Now, Christian Bale's character, Ken Miles, is a character which is also very tough, but at the same time, very sensible. I mean, he knows his cars the way a doctor would know his patients, right? And with that kind of confidence, you might also see him being a little bit arrogant, but I would say that's confidence at its very best without being arrogant. He really, really knows what his job is. Absolutely non-corporate in his behavior, doesn't like any kind of bureaucratic hurdles. He knows his aim and he knows how to get there. So a very fascinating character. So when you see the camaraderie between Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles in the movie, it is one of the highlights of the movie. And you'll see that every time. There is a scene where they fight with each other, absolutely tooth and nail. There are scenes where they joke around. There are scenes when they challenge each other. I think the camaraderie, the chemistry that you see with Matt Damon and Christian Bale is absolutely on top of the world. So that is something you will enjoy as you watch this movie scene by scene, minute by minute. So why do you watch this movie? I know there are hundreds and thousands of movies. Why should I invest 2.5 hours watching a movie like this, even if I'm not a sports enthusiast? So there are many, many reasons why you should watch this movie, but I have tried to cull out the top 5 reasons why I think you should watch this movie. So the first message that you get from this movie is you have to chase excellence, no matter who you are. And that is repeatedly being shown in the movie, whether it is Ken Miles, whether it's Carroll Shelby. They both are good at what they do, but they're never satisfied. They're never content with what they've got. And therefore, they always push themselves and they push each other in terms of getting to the best ever car ever manufactured. And they are chasing their dream like hell. And that's something which is applicable to all of us, no matter who you are, is that every day is a step in the direction of achieving excellence. And only when you do that, you get to know that you're not quite there. And therefore, you keep pushing yourself, you keep pushing yourself, you keep pushing yourself, like putting on one gear at a time. Finally, you hit the full throttle, and that's when you've arrived. But excellence is a journey. That's what you'll get to see throughout the movie. The other message that the movie very, very strongly proves is that you never compromise on what you want. If you have set your eyes on something, you don't compromise on that. They could have easily said, we can't do it. They could have easily stepped back. There was a possibility that Ford company would have said that you are not good enough and therefore you can't do it. And everything of that nature happens, but they believe that they cannot go back from what they started. So they never ever compromise, especially when you look at the character of Carroll Shelby, that's Matt Damon in the movie. He never compromises on the driver he wants. He never compromises on the equipment he wants, on whatever he needs. He gets that done, period. And he gets that done against corporate bureaucracy, which is even more commendable, because a lot of times bureaucratic hurdles can derail the entire project. So he goes around that, he gets what he wants, and he does not compromise on getting exactly what he needs to create history. So I think that's another very, very powerful message that you get from this movie. The third important message that you get to see from this movie is never underestimate your competition. Now, unfortunately, Enzo Ferrari, who is the owner of Ferrari, tends to underestimate Ford's ability to manufacture a sports car, because that has never been done at Ford before. And he believes that it is almost his proprietary birthright to win the car race every year. And therefore, he underestimates Ford. In fact, there is a statement that he makes. He says, I'm not talking to Henry Ford, it is Henry Ford II. And that is something which really triggers Henry Ford II, because he takes that as a personal insult, as a humiliation. And guess what? It is him, Lee Iacocca, Carroll Shelby, Ken Miles, the team put together, and they really go and show what they are capable of. So another character that you'll get to see in this movie is Lee Iacocca, who is a very, very popular chief operating officer from the Ford Motors company. And he also plays a key role. Perhaps he's someone who's fairly instrumental in getting this project on ground. So he is someone who makes everyone believe that we can do it. Okay, so unfortunately, the Ferrari company underestimates their competition, and bang, 1966 Le Mans, they are in for a rude shock. Right. The next message or the next learning from this movie that you'll get to see is never, ever back down from the bullies. You might confront someone who is a lot more powerful, a lot more wealthier, a lot more competent than you, but you got to take that in your stride. You cannot let someone else come and stamp on your feet. And that's, again, a beautiful message in this movie, which is shown, is that you've got to take competition head on. You've got to make sure that no one is capable or no one is given the message that you are freely available, that anyone can come and stamp on your feet or completely destroy you. You've got to believe in yourself and take competition head on. Even if they are bullying, even if they are trying to overpower you, you cannot let that happen. And that's the message that you get in two ways. One, Ford as an organization gives that message back to Ferrari. And you also have Carroll Shelby, who gives that message to the executives at Ford who are trying to derail his project by using their own corporate power. So you cannot let bullies overpower you is another beautiful message, which is prominently displayed and communicated right through this movie. So watch out for that message as well. And finally, last but not the least, this movie is all about inspiration. This movie is all about believing in your convictions, challenging yourself, getting out of your comfort zone, and convincing others about your convictions as well. So all in all, this movie is a beautiful combination of inspiration, of dreams, of adrenaline, about competition, about rivalry, about friendship. So it's a beautiful mixture of several emotions all rolled into one. Okay, so do watch out for this movie whenever you find time. Perhaps this weekend might be the appropriate time when you want to watch this movie and give yourself the much needed adrenaline dose and get inspired. Okay, so I hope this review has helped you get some finer details about this movie. Ford versus Ferrari is a movie that you cannot miss, especially if you are a car sports enthusiast. Right. I hope this movie has given you a lot to think about and haven't spilled any beans thereafter. So please go and watch this movie and do let me know how did you feel after having watched this movie. I'll definitely watch out for your messages as well. Thank you so much for listening and really appreciate the fact that you heard me with a lot of patience and a lot of excitement as well. Thank you so much. I'll see you again.